So, welcome to the Data Faces podcast. I'm David Sweenor. In today's podcast, we're going to connect the dots between the lessons of yesterday and the challenges of today, all through the lens of data and technology. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Kevin Petrie, the VP of Research at BARC US, where he helps businesses navigate the ever-evolving landscape of data, analytics, and AI. Kevin is a fellow Northeaster, a voracious reader, and a history buff. Kevin, welcome to Data Faces. It's great to have you here.
David, I'm glad to be here.
So, Kevin, tell us a little bit about your background, your current role at BARC, and what BARC does and what you're doing over there.
Yeah, I have an unusual background for tech. I was an English major, and I'm a huge bookworm. I still like to read printed books. I was an English major and also a Spanish major, a minor in economics, and I was a financial journalist for 5 years when I first got out of college. Then I went back to business school and started a career that was, right within tech. And so I was on the marketing side for a while, working for vendors such as EMC. I also ran an analytics services team for EMC Pivotal for about 4 years. And I've been an industry analyst for about 5 years, having a ton of fun using my writing analytical skills and trying to navigate our fast-changing world of tech.
Yeah, it's pretty scary out there. I've been reading or listening to on Audible a couple books. One is from Yuval Noah Harari, Nexus, so it's about information networks, and then it was by Mustafa Suleiman's book, The Coming Wave, and they're both a bit depressing. What's your mood? I mean, what are you reading today that people might be interested in?
So I think we're going to be okay. I think that we're actually in an exciting age. And there is a lot that's going on. There's a lot for us to look forward to. I read a book recently, Invention and Innovation. I'm looking at it right now, by Vaclav Smil, and it's a brief history of hype and failure. So he's a skeptic about a lot of the groundbreaking, earth-shaking predictions related to AI, and would assert that, we're in an age of innovation. It's fun, but you know what? The 1880s were pretty innovative too. We had things like bicycles and cars and all sorts of advances in medicine. So as a human species, we've been innovating for a while, and some things will change, but some things won't. So it's a very interesting time.
It is quite. So let's maybe we're gonna talk about the elephant in the room. I'm always wondering, is AI going to take my job? And is there anything we can do about it? So let's take a look at some of the technological precedents there. So you mentioned history. We've got the wheel, the printing press, industrial revolution, what have you, and it often starts with the disruption, but it changes society in pretty profound ways, and I think mostly for the better. So my question to you is really, what parallels do you think we can draw from these past revolutions, I suppose?
Well, so I'm a history geek and certainly not an expert. I'm more of a dabbler in all types of history. But I'd say that there are three things that history seems to tell us. One is that human nature doesn't change. And I think that can kind of guide what we think is going to happen in the future. Humans will continue to want to provide for themselves and their families. They'll want to procreate. They'll want security, and they'll want some level of financial security tied to that. So I think there are certain aspects about human beings that are not going to change. We're very competitive as well. Another thing is that some of the big changes in society that have happened, if we put on our economics hat, are if you have a big change in supply or a big change in demand, that can create disruptions. And so you had the printing press. You mentioned Gutenberg figured out how to create little letters and make them interchangeable. That was the big step forward. And suddenly you had a surplus of reading material, the Bible, starting with the Bible and others. And that led to more education, more consumption, and an increase in demand. Pretty cool stuff. What I think is interesting about AI right now is that there's an extraordinary surplus right now of cognitive power. ChatGPT has stunned us, and we're trying to figure out what that means. But I haven't seen a huge demand for the AI. It's creating some pretty cool opportunities for companies to innovate, some pretty cool opportunities for companies to have writing assistants or editors. I use ChatGPT as more of an editor than a writer. But I haven't seen this ground-shaking increase in demand, because I'm not sure we've figured out what Gen AI in particular, how it's fundamentally going to give us what we want as human beings, which is security, the ability to provide for our families, and the ability to compete with each other. It has created a lot of fear and a lot of fear of missing out. So it's helping us indulge our competitive instincts, and companies are investing in AI hugely, as they should, because they want to compete more effectively. But we haven't quite figured out what the fundamental, huge, voracious demand will be that's related to AI. There probably will be some.
Apparently, Kevin, apparently it's summarization, as far as I can tell.
There you go.
People don't want to read anymore.
Yes, or write. Yeah. You know, it's funny because I like to write and value writing, and I've found that it's pretty good at editing stuff, or even just coaching, not line editing, but just, did you think of this? Did you think of that? So it's a good assistant in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I remember something from business school, like, this notion of Schumpeterian destruction or whatever it was. And the professor, he was a lecturer, and he said, change is inevitable. It always happens. And then sometimes it chews up a generation, but it's for the better. And I always that stuck with me for whatever reason. I'm like, well, what if you're in that generation that's chewed up? That's probably not good. So I hope we're not there, but that's interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe we, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think it also takes time too. There was a great generative AI world event that the GAI Institute's team has had the last couple of years in Boston. I went to the first one. Unfortunately, I was traveling, so I missed the second one. But a Harvard professor, and I'm not remembering his name, but you can search for the title, Termates, Not Tornadoes. And his idea was that, yes, there are fundamental changes that are taking place, but the effect on business models will be more gradual. You won't be leveled by a tornado, but you'll have incremental weakening each year, so you need to adapt.
Interesting. So let's shift maybe a little bit to, sort of labor and automation. And, there's always these, whether we're talking about the Luddites and mechanical looms, or, industrial robots that are helping us, build cars and things like that. So this cycle of destruction and creation, do you think, is this different because it's can change, do cognitive tasks, or, we see all these models and these statistics and metrics that say, hey, they can graduate level reasoning on whatever, pick a domain. Is this different because it's not mechanical and it's more of the knowledge worker type stuff?
Yeah, it is. It's definitely gotten the attention of white collar workers in a way that prior automation waves have not. And that's good. We had it coming. I think if we look at, so I'm an eternal optimist, and I'll just offer that caveat to begin with. But ATM machines are a pretty interesting historical example. ATM machines came out in the 80s, and everyone worried, or a lot of people worried, that it would lead to destruction of teller jobs. But it was interesting. The opposite happened, because suddenly you had the average banking branch that needed 30 people to run, and that had a certain revenue that was required to cover those costs. ATM machines brought it, I think, down in half, maybe to 13 or so. So now you could have banking branches that could be opened more cost effectively in more locations, and that actually led to a net increase in tellers. So that's an interesting case where it's a surprise consequence, and it's a good one. Robo investors, a few years ago, everyone worried that algorithmic investors would replace financial advisors, and that hasn't happened. I think the reason there is that, yes, the core skill of investing in index funds, if that's what you're doing to invest for retirement, is a numerical exercise. In my view, I believe in efficient markets, but what you do need is a human to be your shrink when the markets go down.
Need that companionship. That's a big use case, actually, with the robotics, and especially with aging populations.
You need humans to help you through this.
That's right.
Yeah. So in a similar way, nurses are actually in better shape than doctors, because nurses give you human empathy. Doctors do too. But as you automate some of the cognitive tasks, the human relationship building becomes more important.
But people can be fooled by this, right? I mean, there's time, like there was a jumping around a little bit here, Kevin, but and I remember that movie Ex Machina back in 2014, where the robot, tricked the designers, and as fast it was surprising to me. But in 2022, we had a Google engineer who was working on the Lambda model, and he just thought AI was sentient. And he's no longer with Google. They sacked him. But
Yeah. Yep.
it's real. Some smart people being like, well, this is sentient. So like, I don't know, is just it's a little bit concerning.
Yeah, I think so. I'm definitely not an AI doomer. It can be used for ill intent, no question. And so states or bad guys, more likely states because they have the resources.
Sure.
Governments can use it and in destructive ways. And so AI drones, swarms of AI drones, will be an interesting aspect of warfare going forward. But I don't know. I think that fundamentally, if there's one thing we learned from COVID, it's that people don't really like living through screens. You and I are doing it right now, but they really would rather. We'll have to have a beer sometime.
Well, that's true. It's like the Bubble Boy episode with Seinfeld. It just didn't work out.
That's right. Exactly. People like to interact with people. They like to do business with people. They like to live and learn and teach people. And I don't think robots in a fundamental massive way are going to change that dynamic.
Yeah, I sort of I agree with you. I'm an optimist too. I'm a positivist on that. I think AI can be used for tremendous good. Let's jump back to the Luddites though a little bit.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we're going to be smashing looms with these giant hammers anymore. But is there any like historical? I think in the end there was fear, right? And they were maybe over exaggerated in some cases, probably, but maybe not totally unwarranted. So I guess, how do we separate this? I'll call it maybe productive caution from unwarranted, panic. Is there anything we can look to in history that could help us there?
Yeah, I guess what I would say is that when one industry or pocket of jobs declines, others often go up. And in my view, what's really happening with AI right now is that it can perform cognitive tasks in a somewhat reliable way. Hallucinations are coming down. We still have some work to do, but you still need human ingenuity to string together tasks. You still need human ingenuity to figure out how to integrate all this, how to feed it the right inputs. So AI, in my view, is kind of like really powerful Legos right now, but you still need to build the Lego structures yourself. And so, there are historical parallels in the sense that we've had massive increases in capabilities, but it created new pockets of jobs. Cars coming around was disruptive to the horse industry. Put a lot of horses out of pasture, which is right. But it also impacted a lot of people who created those things. It impacted people who created the wagons that enabled all the settlers to move across the United States and so forth. But it created new jobs, arguably higher paying jobs in the form of factories and so forth. So it's a question of humans being adaptable and figuring out new ways to meet their fundamental needs of financial security, the ability to nurture each other, raise families, and so forth.
Yeah, and if we look at the second revolution, industrial revolution or what have you, some of these jobs, they were unsafe, they were dirty, they were bad for your health. I mean, I used to work at a paper mill, Kevin, and literally logs would come into this factory. It was like one of the only ones where raw logs come in and paper comes out the other side of it. But part of this thing is these logs get jammed up, so you have people by the conveyor with these giant hooks, and you're trying to get them and write them so they can go through the machines properly, but extremely dangerous. And it's you can imagine people get hurt if you fall in or whatever. Someone's got to keep an eye on that. And so that wasn't a great job. It was high paying because it was dangerous, but I think that could have used some robotic automation at the time. So I think a lot of these jobs that were dangerous, I think AI is going to help it, or you're just monotonous and robotic. But I do wonder what happens to the people who are displaced, and how quickly new jobs become available. Because I agree with you. We didn't have iPhone techs back in the day. Now you need them, or if you can fix an iPhone, I'm not sure. But we have jobs like that didn't exist. So my
Yeah.
question is like, how fast does this transformation happen?
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see. It does look like adoption of AI is happening, but it's more, I think we found about a fifth of companies are taking a programmatic, comprehensive approach to deploying AI. Others are kicking the tires, experimenting, or wondering what they should do. So it's going to take time. It took a long time for companies to get a productivity boost from adopting computers. It wasn't really until the late 90s that productivity benefits came around. So it takes time to deploy these things, use them, and get advantages from it. But yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of the jobs that change, it's not necessarily a bad thing. You still need people to figure out what these robots are going to do, and you need people to figure out how to string them together. I saw that Amazon is opening its most advanced warehouse yet, with a lot more robotics, a lot more automation than ever before, and a lot more people. They need
Sure.
people to manage these robots. So they're higher paying jobs. So part of the challenge gets to education, preparing people for more software oriented jobs, and in some cases less manual jobs.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. So maybe let's talk a little bit about unintended consequences. So when the
Yeah.
internet came out, it was gonna save the world. It was, but it had a lot of misinformation, surveillance at scale for nation states. You mentioned early. So how do you anticipate the risk and maximize the benefits? If you look at anything about social media today, it's had some pretty deleterious effects. People have body dysmorphia, depression, anxiety, loneliness, etc. But it also has some great use cases where you can talk to people far away and on video that you might not see, and companionship and things like that. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on the balance of that.
It really is hard, because it's hard to predict where, yes, human nature doesn't change, but there are always disruptions that you can't quite predict. And there are new sources of profit from an economic perspective that you wouldn't otherwise predict. It's interesting, in the 1800s, hundreds of thousands of people during decades or even a year were moving across the soon to be United States. And they were doing so because there was this perceived surplus of land. Obviously, that was being taken from prior tenants, which is not something we should beat our chest about. But it did create this extraordinary demand for wagons. And so you had the first major manufacturing giants, including John Deere and others, that got started because they were using interchangeable parts to make all the wagons that carried the settlers across country. And I think that a lot of the people who started out on that journey in order to find gold or find land or find other sources of their dreams didn't think they'd be creating this whole contributing to the Industrial Revolution with interchangeable parts and the creation of wagons. So I guess the answer is unintended consequences can be good too, and they're really hard to predict.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, it was interesting. I was reading about there was an article in the Rockefeller Institute, a while ago, but they commented in there about the Google's co-founders, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, and they were talking about search and advertising and mixed motives, and it's fundamentally said that if you have advertising funded type search, you could be biased towards the advertisers and away from the needs of the consumers. So I think there's some this commercial in here, right? Because these algorithms, right, they're reward based, and then the reward for the people designing them, they want that engagement. So I'm wondering if you see any ways or parallels on how we should think about this, because the companies get paid when you clicked or engage with there, and they're designed to do that. And there's been some pretty horrible consequences from that. But I don't want to be negative here, but when a commercial entity's there, how do we deal with this?
yeah, I don't know what the key answer is in terms of navigating unintended consequences or creating adverse incentives. There's an interesting example right now with Google, which is that in order to keep up with OpenAI, they've released, I think it's Gemini driven, you search for something at Google now, and often as not, you'll get an AI generated summary flagged as such. And I always fact check what's below with the real link, but it's getting pretty good. So Google's doing a good job offering that for free, but if they're summarizing it for you right there, you don't need to click on the link. And so their search volume of people clicking through is going down. So they've developed a new cool disruptive product for free that's undermining their core advertising link business. And so it's hard. You got to be careful what kind of incentives you're creating for the people that you want to do business with.
Yeah, I think they're realizing that Perplexity AI. I use that almost exclusively now for searching.
Okay.
It does that same thing. It gives you the links. But what I've noticed is sometimes the links, you go look at them and it's just AI generated dribble. So they're not reputable links, but they look authoritative because not very many people go look at the footnotes, and I don't think they've cracked the nut on the monetization of it. It's going to be more than your $20 a month subscription or whatever these things are costing these days. So I'm curious of your perspective on the what's going to happen as they figure out how to monetize it. Are we each going to be in our own AI echo chamber? I mean, kind of are now and social media, but just curious.
Yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things you don't have a crystal ball for. Excuse me. It does seem to me that ultimately the value of AI will need to help us with our core desire to interact with humans rather than interacting with screens or bots, to help us provide for ourselves and so forth. And so I don't know. I'm just not as worried about AI supplanting human relationships. I do worry a little bit with children because you could have AI nannies that never get tired of reading to the kids, that always know how to discipline them or chastise them or coach them or things like that. So busy parents, two worker parent families could have just sort of an AI nanny that they let do some of the child rearing. And that's kind of a creepy thing because that child has not grown up in a normal human environment and therefore might have some dystopian tendencies.
Yeah, I definitely agree that it used to be Saturday morning cartoons. Get away from the TV. Then it was like the iPad, and now you have something else to worry about.
We used to worry about it being too violent to watch the Roadrunner fall off the cliff, but that's only beginning.
That's right. That's right. So let's talk a little bit about maybe global competition. We've had space race, and we see AIs. There's economics involved. There's national security. So how do you think AI is going to, maybe potentially reshape or rekindle old international rivalries, create new ones? What lessons can we learn on that front?
Yeah, well, Ukraine is a great crucible right now for extraordinary demand, which is survival, creating innovation. And there's a whole robust cottage industry of drone making out of people's garages and so forth. And they're making pretty smart, often AI-driven drones that can fight back against the Russians. That's pretty inspiring. And so it's one example of how, and they're creating a level of innovation and a type of warfare that an asset that the United States needs to get behind and figure out how to have ready too, because AI-driven swarms of drones can really disarm some of the conventional weapons. So that's one thought. There's a new imperative to innovate when it comes to warfare and defense. And Silicon Valley is actually getting involved there more and more. OpenAI and others are starting to work with the federal government. Palantir's been doing a fair amount already. But there are definitely unintended consequences because the U.S. is restricting the GPUs that can go to China in order to throttle its AI innovation in the race for general intelligence. But that's created a new demand within China, which is that Chinese are getting pretty innovative about skirting those rules. Not skirting the rules, yes, but actually innovating with less powerful chips. So they're able to more efficiently devise creative uses of software and more efficiently experiment with small language models, which I think we all agree have a real future globally. So there are definitely ways in which you need to be careful messing with the free market in terms of government policies.
Right. So do we, I mean, some people will talk about, this global AI ethics framework, is there hope, maybe we could look to maybe the closest thing could be some sort of, I don't know, nuclear non-proliferation or something like that. And so
Yeah,
maybe that's a bit tenuous, but what do you think the chances are on that global framework?
I hope so. The European Union's done a good job on leading the charge on this. They did it with GDPR 5-6 years ago, and we followed with sort of a patchwork of imitation rules related to privacy, digital privacy here in the States. And they've already come out with an AI Act that kind of scales the permissibility of different types of AI. I think it's sort of a crude measure, but we definitely need to all get on the same page. Governments need to, and the private sector as well, about what's permissible and what aligns with our human values. Ultimately, I think from a private market perspective, hopefully the open market forces will guide that. Companies will not want to be perceived as predatory. My hope is that companies like Meta or the future Metas will aim to demonstrate goodwill towards their users.
Yeah, I think so. I am hopeful. Obviously they'll be making lots of money, but I hope there'll be a backlash because there's so many alternatives now, right? There's not like just one game in town. So there's the commercial makers of these things. There's a bunch of open source models out there, and to your point, small language models, more task specific. So I don't think we're just locked into a couple big vendors. I think there's a lot more opportunity and alternatives out there, so that will help that along.
Yeah, I hope
okay.
so.
You've mentioned this has sort of been maybe the last question here, and this has been a recurring theme, and I'm happy you brought it up. It's this human adaptability, and we have changed, and we've always been resilient. So as AI continues to evolve at a pace we probably have never seen in the history of humankind, what historical patterns can we look at, and what might be different this time?
So as a history buff, I read a lot about war, and which is a little gloomy, but I guess what I'd say is, yes, we're in rapidly changing times, but fortunately, a lot of us, and this isn't true of Israel, this isn't true of Ukraine, this isn't true of Syria, but we live in peaceful environments, and I think that it's important to put doomsday speculation and fears about AI in perspective. We're not talking about global war. We're not talking about global depression or famine or things like that. So we're living, a lot of us, not all of us, in pretty comfortable times across history. We've really never lived in better times. So that's one thing to kind of keep in mind. Yeah.
I mean, Bill Gates talks a lot about that. By every metric, we are better off today than we were, whatever, 150 years ago. So totally agree with you. So I guess the final question, Kevin, there's all this talk about productivity improvements. So my question to you is there hope for the 4-day work week I've been promised?
Yeah, there might be.
Wow, I can almost an optimist there, a techno optimist. I love it.
Yeah. Well, part of it's cultural, where I'm American. I have German colleagues who I think have a healthier sense of work-life balance. They're working 5 days a week, but I think that part of it's just I think Americans getting over themselves and letting themselves not work 5 days a week. I know a lot of jobs would dictate otherwise, but we could make the bots. We could create digital twins of ourselves with Gen AI, knowledge workers that'll increase productivity, that 20% you need. Who knows?
Yeah, what is interesting? I was on a meeting the other day. There were more bots on the call than humans, so I found
that's the funny thing.
I found that interesting. Like, why do I even need to be there? We'll let the bots do all the talking for us. Oh my gosh. All right, Kevin. Well, hey, this is it's been great to have you on. I really enjoyed the discussion and conversation. So thank you for being guest number 2 on the Data Faces podcast.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thanks.